Hello, everyone. It's time again for the SMC Journal podcast. I'm Scott Moore, your host. This is the show where it's all about performance engineering in IT today. We started this show in January. We've had over 20 episodes, and I think when people heard that I was going to start this twice a week podcast, that I was just going to be sitting here talking about load testing tools and talk about LoadRunner all the time. And you might be surprised to know that we haven't talked about any load testing tool, and we haven't talked about LoadRunner other than in passing. But today we're going to talk about load testing tools, and we're going to talk about LoadRunner specifically. And it's not just because they're a sponsor of the show, but while we're on the subject, let's talk about that. Thank you, Micro Focus, for being one of our premier sponsors for the SMC Journal, makers of LoadRunner Professional, Cloud, and Enterprise, as well as Developer. Please scan that QR code and check out their website. Performance matters to them. They have one of the largest communities of performance testers in the world, and you can reach out to them at community.microfocus.com. We have links to everything in our show notes about them, and there's also a playlist on YouTube of performance engineering topics, performance testing topics, and videos that you can watch out there around LoadRunner. So thank you very much. I figured I'd go ahead and get that in. So the sponsorship that you have, Micro Focus, of this show proves that you're serious about supporting the performance community. So here we are. I'm talking about LoadRunner, and in the near future, there's going to be another release of LoadRunner. I don't know exactly when, but I know it's coming soon because in late January, I attended an online forum called the LoadRunner Family Virtual Forum. You can register for it still, even though it's already been done. There's a recording of it that you can play back, and I've got a link to that on the show notes as well, where they had an overview of where they're taking LoadRunner for 2022 and getting people prepared for the next release, which we should be pretty close to that right now. So we're not too far ahead, and this is all publicly available information. This is not something that I gained from internal connections or anything like that. This is something you can find out yourself, and this was presented by R&D. There were several members of R&D on this webinar who in the Q&A section actually revealed even more information about where they're taking LoadRunner. So if you ever have a chance to attend one of these where there are R&D folks on the call, you should attend if you want to find out the direction of the product. There was also a presentation by Jonathan Wright, who right after that presentation, just several days later, announced he was going to Keysight Technologies. But Jonathan has been involved with Vivint for a long period of time. He knows everybody. We know everybody. It was a great presentation. I'm going to share a slide from that as well. So I thought it was a good webinar, but it was some good information that I'm going to highlight for you today. Obviously, you can watch this for yourself and get the details, but I just thought there were some pretty interesting things to note. So this is one of the slides that was presented when R&D was discussing the roadmap, and they talk about how they're working on meeting these following challenges. The first is getting the groups who are doing all the load testing, the ones that are doing it on the shift left side and the ones that are doing it integrated on the shift right side, making sure that they are not disconnected, that they can use the same product, they can build performance into the product earlier and all along the life cycle, and the tool won't get in the way. So that's something they're trying to address and have been addressing for years. Greater variety, in other words, there's more technologies are changing, monitors need to be updated, there are probably things that need to be deprecated, and they talk about some of the core innovations that they've had, and I'll mention at least one of those that they talked about in just a moment. The complexity, which means that there's more stuff in that you need to be considerate of in analysis, and analysis needs to get smarter. So they're talking about smart things in here, smart scenarios, smart analysis, and having LoadRunner have a component in there that's we're talking about machine learning and AI now within LoadRunner, which I thought was really cool. And also keeping the cost of creating and maintaining your script so it doesn't take as long to script, it doesn't take as much effort and time and resources to actually update the scripts that you use on long-running projects. Because in the enterprise, many times there are projects that go on for years. I'm thinking like large SAP implementations where they have to revisit it on many different revisions, and those scripts have to be maintained. So that's a on their mind constantly about that. The next version of LoadRunner is version 2022. We're told in this call it will be in the March-ish timeframe, but understand Micro Focus is a publicly traded company and they have no there's no way that they can commit to say a certain date or whatever. So it may not be in March, but we think it's coming soon, and when it does, these are some of the things that you can expect to be in the next version, or at least being maybe previewed or talked about over the next version or so. So here's the about a dozen things that I picked up, and you know, you tell me, you give me some feedback on what you think about these. But there is going to be an effort, first of all, to merge products, specifically LoadRunner Professional and LoadRunner Enterprise. And for those of you who have been users of LoadRunner for a long time, you know there was LoadRunner, which was basically the desktop interface to do performance testing. And usually that was around 1 or 2 projects, 1 or 2 people using it. It was sort of a smaller load testing lab. And then you had Performance Center, which is now called LoadRunner Enterprise, which could take that and scale that with a web UI around it. Same features, actually a superset of features generally in Enterprise to make it scale and work within teams of people, however big that got, however many departments that got, all running parallel and make it as big as you want to make it. It was also before tied into Quality Center, which is, so I think one of the first steps they made over a recent year or so is kind of making LoadRunner Enterprise its own standalone product without the hook into Quality Center, except where you need to integrate it. But the idea of taking LoadRunner Professional and merging it in with LoadRunner Enterprise, maybe to have a single GUI and maybe just to have a set of features, if you want to just do single projects versus globally scale it, maybe same code base, maybe that's going to make it easier and less expensive to maintain those code bases. I'm just guessing here. We see that already in like products like Tricentis Neoload, where there's a Neoload GUI and there's a user who would be more project centric, who I'm the person who does this performance test on this project over and over again, and they need some of the they need to record their business processes and put time, and they use the Neoload GUI for that, which is their desktop application. But then they also need some features of Neoload Web. So right now, Tricentis, just doing a comparison between LoadRunner and Neoload, you've got this Neoload GUI with a set of features and Neoload Web with some of the same features and some superset of features in Neoload Web, which makes it easier to scale out to teams like LoadRunner Enterprise. But there are also some things that don't necessarily map one-to-one, or there may be some things in the Neoload GUI who have not made it to Neoload Web, and that's a process Tricentis is doing right now, whereas LoadRunner and LoadRunner Enterprise, you just get like this super set of features that are out there and it's kind of shared. And don't forget LoadRunner Cloud also. A lot of people think, well, LoadRunner Cloud is just Micro Focus's hosted version of LoadRunner Enterprise, which is not the case. Analysis is different, how it's handled is different, and I think maybe it's time, and this may be what Micro Focus is thinking, maybe it's time to take some of these code bases and start deprecating some things, merging some code bases in, and make it easier to maintain for our users and make it consistent across the board. That's what I get out of this. So enough about that piece. Let's talk about some of the more interesting features that I heard about. You're going to hear about some enhanced integrations. Namely, there's going to be an enhanced integration with service virtualization. That's another product that Micro Focus offers. So think about mocking up backends or third-party calls where you don't really want to call them, but you need them in a test environment. You can control, like I want to call a PayPal type equivalent service, and then I want to slow that service down to see how that third-party call affects my application. You're going to see integration with that product that does that, which I think is very important for load testing in a lab environment. The bigger integration and the bigger thing that I'm hearing is integration with Gremlin, which is adding chaos testing or resilience testing into LoadRunner and actually providing additional metrics in analysis that address the resiliency of an application. So now we're starting to see where it's almost like resiliency is a cousin of performance. So we want it to be working well for one, working well under load, but we also want it to be resilient under load as well. Generally, it is resilient for one, or that's not functional, right? But then it becomes not functional under load when it doesn't perform for many, or it doesn't, there's an outage because of load. So the integration with Gremlin is going to be interesting to see, and I'd actually like to see how analysis changed and what type of metrics they're actually calling out. What I understand is there's going to be about 11, almost a dozen variations of a test, and it's going to include things like, I'm looking at my notes here, process killers. What's another one? Networking packet loss, some of the same things that you might see with network virtualization, but maybe to the next level. And there will be graphs and overlays that show these chaos events that happen that maybe you scheduled during a load test. I get up to this amount, but then I also pull a lever that takes down a server or takes down a pod. So you'll see that overlaid in how that affects analysis as well. That's going to be pretty interesting to see. So those integrations are exciting. Incorporating Kafka for the scalability piece for the analysis. So many of you may remember the original LoadRunner Professional analysis database schema and database was like a Microsoft Access type database format, which then I think turned into SQLite at one point. You can actually go in and point analysis to a Microsoft SQL server, create have the schema created, and that will give you much more scalability, and then even allow you to write your own type of custom reports based upon the analysis metrics as well, which some people have actually done in the past. But of course, SQL Server is much more scalable than just this local copy of analysis. It looks like they're going to be grabbing a lot more things for analysis, and they're going to need a bigger, better engine for that. And I think that's where Kafka is going to come into play. And they're probably going to be adding monitors around Kafka and other technologies as well. And along those lines, where you've got all this new data and all these new metrics, you're going to start hearing about smart scenarios, smart analysis, and trending, where LoadRunner is going to begin providing you some guidance on things. For example, you set up a scenario and you're going to run a 5,000 virtual user scenario using this particular protocol, but you've only set up 2 load generators. LoadRunner might tell you, hey, you don't have enough resources to run this test. You need more generators, or it won't meet your requirements there. So you're going to hear about that capability. There's also something they're calling OneAnalysis, like OneAnalysis is one word, that says in the notes here, a new experience with new capabilities. Don't know what that is yet, but it does sound interesting. And as you hear me say over and over and over again, the value really in LoadRunner or any load testing tool is in the analysis, and LoadRunner has had the best analysis for many, many years. And I don't think they've done enough, really. I don't think any load testing vendor has done enough to emphasize analysis and continue taking it forward to the next level natively. People have gone out and started using R. They export everything out to a time series database like Influx and start using Grafana. They create their own reporting around that. It's time for the load testing vendors to probably step up and take analysis to the next level for where we are in 2022. So is this an effort to do that? I'm assuming that is. Along the lines of new technologies, they're going to be extending their cloud and Docker load generator deployment. There's going to be more regions for their cloud-based load generators, and they're going to allow for Openshift deployment of load generators as well. So that's interesting. Around reducing scripting and maintenance, there's supposed to be some enhancements coming around the TrueClient protocol. And from what I'm being told, there is a modernization project that they're, I guess, calling TrueClient 2.0 maybe, that's going to possibly include the Linux platform for creating TrueClient scripts using Linux operating system to do that. So that sounds pretty cool as well. LoadRunner Developer will now support the latest M1 Macs. So that's another thing where they're trying to get more inclusive of all operating systems as well, because, for many years, LoadRunner was a Windows-only platform for everything except the generator piece. So will we see that begin to expand as well? Could be pretty interesting. So I thought that was a lot of these notes that I'm getting here were from the conversations in the Q&A that were after the main presentation. So when you watch this presentation yourself, this webinar, make sure you listen all the way through and listen to what the R&D folks are saying, because they actually give a lot more information rather than just the regular slide. So one more slide that I wanted to share, which was from Jonathan Wright's presentation, where he talks through, I guess this might be an example or something that he's actually set up, but he mentions a lot of things in the slide. I'll let him speak to that on the webinar that you can watch it. But I really want to just focus on, look at the flexibility of LoadRunner here, because yes, you have a TrueClient UI, which greatly simplifies complex JavaScript heavy front end, thick web clients, making it easier to do. Yes, they have a bigger footprint, but then you also have the ability to run API testing at the same exact time, multiple protocol scripting, and you see there at the bottom, Gatling and JMeter included right alongside LoadRunner scripts, running hand in hand. You may have a TrueClient script that addresses the GUI side with your JMeter scripts handling the network protocol level. So for someone to come up to me on the street, which happens every once in a while, saying, well, we use JMeter and you can't use LoadRunner with, you got to choose one or the other, open source or commercial tool. Well, why? Why, when this supports the open source tools that maybe your developers are already using right now to do those 50 virtual user load tests, and you've got this integrated testing tool with great analysis, why not pull in what they're doing and be able to reuse it for the integrated load testing as well, and just adding some TrueClient scripts on top of it. I'm sure many clients are doing that, but some maybe have not seen the light on that yet. Also, he mentions about virtual table server in there. That's another thing that originally started out as this sort of unsupported experimental thing that some really smart person did because they needed to solve a problem, probably a consultant for Mercury at the time, and said, look, we'll make this available. But it's, at that time it was almost like a living Excel spreadsheet for your parameter data, and it turned into a actual scalable virtual table solution that's like almost like a mock database that you can use for just parameters, which I think is interesting. He mentions in here they had a customer who was on Azure and they needed to be able to integrate the monitoring insights from Azure specifically, which they do now support in LoadRunner as well, and it was very successful. And then at the end of this, so you're running this, you've got open source next to the commercial, running virtual table server for dynamic data. You're also pulling maybe your metrics from the cloud for your infrastructure, your CPU memory, and all of those good things, plus maybe a hybrid of some other stuff where you've got to use, Unix, standard Unix or Perfmon and Windows monitoring mixed with that. I mean, this is crazy stuff you're able to do. And at the end of it, if you don't like just seeing the analysis and you want to spit it out somewhere else, you can also use the API for analysis, and you can then port it out to a time series database like InfluxDB and run Grafanographs against it. So, I mean, this is a perfect example just to show you that LoadRunner really is it's the Swiss Army knife. It's the Cadillac because it has all these options. Does everyone need all these options? Well, probably not. But they're at the enterprise level, when you're dealing with 500 different applications across 50 different technology stacks, and you've got 25 different teams that need load testing. Yeah, you probably do need a lot of this stuff from time to time. So the fact that we're seeing LoadRunner continue to be developed, continue to be modernized for today's IT, I think says something. So I'm looking for the next version of LoadRunner to be coming out at any time. I want to be able to see it and look at it myself. There's a couple things I'm looking forward to messing with, specifically the Gremlin thing. I really want to see how that integrates and works out and see those metrics, because I do think you will begin seeing that style of load test being a new kind of a new scenario type, right? So we have our standard, low level performance testing, and then that larger test where can we reach 100%, can we reach 150% of peak load, but can we also reach 100% when things are going really bad and really going wrong, and how easy is it to cause an outage under load versus more load or different load, and what are those metrics you see? I think that'll be an interesting thing to see. What do you think is the question? So you can always reach me for feedback at scottmoore.consulting. There is my LinkedIn profile. You can also reach me by email at help@scottmoore.consulting. What I'd really appreciate is if you could subscribe to our YouTube channel, because we are getting really close to breaching 1,000. And when we do reach 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to give away something really special and really cool that you're going to enjoy. So tell all your friends, watch the show, and subscribe if you would. We've already talked about one of our great sponsors, Micro Focus, but that's not the only sponsor for this episode. We are also sponsored by StormForge. That is a fairly new sponsor for us. Let me tell you about them. They are a platform that focuses on AI-powered software designed performance tuning that helps your DevOps team release with confidence and lets your IT leaders realize the promise of being cloud native, which is faster innovation, higher quality, higher resiliency, higher scalability, higher efficiency. Check out stormforge.io. We are also sponsored by Bright Payment Solution. Bright Payment Solutions provide merchant services for a wide variety of credit card companies. So if you're taking point of sale credit card transactions and you want to have the lowest rates with the lowest fees possible, they help your business generate higher revenue through a variety of payment solutions, and they also have their own point of sale equipment. So check them out at brighteps.com. So that's today's show for today. What do you think about the direction of LoadRunner? Watch this webinar and give me some feedback on it. What do you think? You're going to be trying out the new version? I will be. Until next time, this is Scott Moore signing off for the SMC Journal podcast, where it's all about performance in IT today.